Welcome to the first episode of Dynasty Playbook. I'm your host, Tristan, with my co host, Billy, and today we're going to get into the 2025 running back rankings for the offseason. The season's coming to an end. There's still a few playoff games left in the season, but we thought we would give you our rankings as we enter the offseason for Dynasty. Billy, do you want to get into how this would be structured and how we're going to go about it?
Yeah, so we have 5 tiers here, and just because you didn't mention, we do have a couple rookies in the upcoming class included on this list. So
Yes.
the tiers are not like even. We're not going to have like five backs in each tier. So if we can, you want to go ahead and hop into it, we can do that.
Yeah, and I think it would be it'd be good to mention that this is not necessarily a running back number 1, 2, 3 through 25. No, we're going to have a tier one. We're going to have a few running backs on it. We may prefer one over the other. Billy may have a different opinion than I do, and we're just going to give a few bullet points on why these running backs are our tier one or why these are our tier two, and what you should be excited for in these backs. Billy, I'm going to jump into the tier one, and I'll let you explain the first running back.
Okay, so here we got Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson. I tend to lean Gibbs. He's on a better offense. He was a more efficient runner. I think he has higher receiving upside. He doesn't get as many touches as Bijan, but I don't think that matters quite as much because you saw, especially with what he did the last week of the season, I think it was 46 fantasy points in PPR leagues. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You can take either one at RB1 though, but very obviously the tier one.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think Gibbs is probably the consensus number one on most dynasty boards. He was a very efficient runner. He was also a good receiving back. But I don't think we can overlook Bijan as well. I think, Bijan is almost the same back. He's just in a worse offense. And I think both of these guys are tier one on most boards. And that's the reason, we're going to run our rankings and go from tier one through tier five, because I think when a viewer watches a video and looks at the rankings on almost every board, they're going to have Gibbs and Bijan as one. Occasionally you may see a Saquon, but I think these are the consensus 1 and 2, with Gibbs probably being the favorite.
Yeah, and we will factor age in. We tend to skew age heavily in the, or not super heavily, but like with these being two super young backs, both in their second seasons in the league and at the level they are. That's why they are in tier one over some older backs that may have performed at the same level.
Yes, I totally agree. I'm going to jump into tier two here. I'll let you hit the first running back, and we can just go one after another, and maybe list some of our, why we like these backs, and just go from there.
Yes, we have Devon Achane, Kyron Williams. Here's our first rookie, Ashton Genty's in here. Then there's Bucky Irving, Saquon Barkley, and Brees Hall on here. So I'll just sort of hop into uh, Devon Achane. I would, if he was more consistent with his play without Tua, because there's a very big difference in his splits with and without Tua, I would put him pretty close, if not in tier one, because he was less efficient as a runner this year. He was one of the most efficient runners ever his rookie year, but he was a lot less efficient this year. He has an extremely high receiving upside. But like I said, the difference with and without Tua is very noticeable. It is over 22 points per game when he's playing with Tua, and it's under 10 when he's not playing with Tua.
Yeah, I think Devon Achane's a pretty underrated back, and I think it's exactly because of what you have noted. It's his production with Tua and then without, and most dynasty players want the consistent back, the one that's going to get you 15, 20 points a week, 20 on the high, but 15 points a week. They want the consistent back, and because he has that drop off without Tua, I think it makes him a little underrated. But hopefully, if Tua is healthy this coming year, he should have a pretty good year, especially if Tyreek's gone.
Yeah,
But
and
I'll
with
jump into
the
the next back, Kyron Williams. He averaged 17 points per game. He was less efficient this year than he was last year, but he had similar production. I think he's been Mr. Consistent the last 2 years. I had my worries about him with him not really have the draft compensation. He was drafted in the late fourth round, I believe.
it was
Is that
fifth
right?
round.
fifth round. He was drafted in the fifth round, and so that always makes you worry early on in a running back's career because they could be easily replaced. But after 2 solid years of production, I think he definitely deserves to be in this tier 2 list.
Yeah, like with what you said, they did draft Blake Corum, that scared a lot of people away last year, but they kept giving him the ball this year to where I think he's established enough to where a lot of those concerns just aren't there anymore.
Yes, yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. And then for Ashton Genty, he is going to be the RB1 on the rookie board for everybody. He is a historically great college back, very good at forcing missed tackles, very good at continuing runs after his contact or after the first contact. And then he didn't get much receiving work this year, but in previous years, he has gotten pretty good receiving work. He's a capable receiver out of the backfield.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think he's the rookie running back that everybody's wanted to draft. He should be the 101 in the rookie draft this year, unless something crazy happens. But he's probably going to go to a pretty good team, if I had to guess. Probably the Dallas Cowboys. That seems like that's the favorite team for him to land at. But I think he's the type of prospect that no matter what team he lands on, he should be a solid option for Dynasty next year, even for fantasy, even for redraft. But I'll jump into the next one here. Bucky Irving. Bucky, he averaged 14.4 points per game last year. That's pretty good, especially coming from a rookie who didn't get a full workload until later in the season. He had only 2 games with double-digit carries in the first 9 weeks and only 1 game with under 12 carries in the remainder of the season. Before the bye week, he averaged 9.75 points per game. After the bye, he averaged 18.34. So that was a huge uptick in production after the bye week. I will say that I have traded Bucky in our Dynasty League, and I regretted it extremely. I traded him after the bye week. I was trying to make a run for our playoffs, and it didn't work out for me. So Bucky's a guy I would definitely draft, especially if you're drafting in your Dynasty league, or if you're looking to make a trade. Bucky's a guy that could be pretty solid for this coming season.
Yeah, and with that 18.34 points per game after the bye week, that is including a week when he got injured early on. So if you exclude that week, it was over 20 points per game.
Yeah, and that's pretty solid. That would put him up there in the tier 1 with Gibbs and Bijan.
Yeah. And then right after Bucky on here, like we said earlier, though, you can order these however you want in these tiers. So this isn't necessarily how we have them ranked, but the next one up after Bucky is Saquon, who is the oldest back of the ones we've shown so far. He's 27 years old, going on 28. He would definitely be RB1 in redraft. He just had one of the best seasons we've seen from a running back like ever. Very efficient. Became, I believe it was the 9th running back to ever have 2,000 yards rushing in a season. He would be tier 1 if he was 3 years younger, even 2 years younger. If he was 25, he'd be tier 1.
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue with Saquon being in this tier 2 list. He definitely shouldn't be a tier 3, as his production just speaks for itself. If you're more of a team that's competing now, I think Bijan's tier 1. I think if you're looking to be a contender in the next year or two, I think you trade for Saquon. I think he's probably one of the number 1 running backs, on the board for you. You'd probably have to give up less value than you would for a Gibbs or a Bijan. But if you're looking for the long-term option, I definitely would lean Gibbs and Bijan. But, again, age factors in for us, but you can't argue with the production that Saquon's had. As we round off the tier 2, we've got Breece Hall. Breece Hall was much less productive this season than he was last. He fell from running back 2 to running back 17. He was less efficient and had a lot less receiving work. The one thing I will say about Breece Hall, is he's a very talented running back, and it's hard to argue with. It's hard to drop him down multiple tiers when he was the running back 2. He still averaged 15 points per game, and you would think that, with the Jets having this extreme overhaul, Aaron Rodgers, we don't know if he's going to be there. We don't know the coach that they're going to have. it could be very, very well in the realm of possibility that he has another 20-point season next year.
Yeah, with the RB2 to RB17, that is based on the points per game that he had this year. And so we don't include the last week of the season where most leagues are not playing. And then with the much less productive, he had a lot less targets this year. I think it was like around 20 less targets from like in the passing game this year.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw somewhere, I forgot where I saw it, the receivers on the Jets, I believe they lead the NFL in red zone target percentage. Like they throw more passes in the red zone than almost every other team. So Brees and even Braylon Allen, like all the backs are getting less opportunities in the red zone. So it's going to affect their scoring.
Yeah, I'm looking here, and I see that he had 5 touchdowns this season with or 5 rushing touchdowns with 2 receiving. Let's compare that to 2023.
I think it's the same
2023,
rushing touchdowns.
yeah, it is. He's got 5 rushing and 4 receiving. So it really didn't change that much. But you
Yeah,
would
I think
think,
his receptions is what changed the most because yeah, I believe he had 95 targets in 2023 and that dropped into the 70, which is still a in the 70s is still a really good like target share for a running back to have. But that's a
yeah,
big drop off for what he had.
yeah, I think as that offense improves, they're probably going to see an overhaul this season. And, most teams that do see an overhaul, they lean in on the run game. And I think he could be a solid option for next year.
Yeah, depending on how the offense goes, we could
Yeah.
definitely see him up in tier one if he has another great year next year because he is still very young.
Okay, well, I'm gonna switch it over to our tier three, and as we enter the tier three, the first person you will see is Derrick Henry. It's hard to argue with his production. He's similar than Saquon. Had a very good season this year, but he's 31 years old. In redraft, I think he's a top 4 running back. It's hard to argue that he's not one of the best running backs in a redraft league. But with his age, with him being 31 years old, it it's hard to put him in the tier 2, tier 1 list. He's very dynamic, especially on the Ravens with Lamar Jackson. The it's hard to stop the run game with him and Lamar. But the age is just what we worry about here.
Yeah, and if you look to the next one, it's Christian McCaffrey, who is also on the older side, younger than Derrick Henry, but he's on the older side for a running back. And very obviously, he missed most of the season this year with an injury. He was RB1 in 2023, though, so you can't knock him down too much because if he's healthy, he could still put up another 20 plus point per game season and be RB1. That receiving upside is second to none. Well, second maybe to the next person on the list.
Yes, yes. And the next person on the list would be Alvin Kamara. He had 19 points per game. He's a great receiving threat. We've seen that over the years. He demands a lot of targets. The offense that he's kind of been built in is, just the little drop off to the running back. And the only worry about him is the same thing as Derrick Henry. He will be 30 next season. And, we're going to have him tier 3 because of his age.
And then next up, we had Josh Jacobs, who huge bounce back season for him after leaving the Raiders and joining the Packers. I believe he caught his first career receiving touchdown this year, which is
It's
crazy
kind of
to
crazy to
say
think
for
about.
somebody that's been in the league for that long.
Yeah,
Yeah, he had
that's
17.2 points per game. And if he was a slightly better receiving threat, he's still a decent receiving threat, but just not a scoring threat through the air. If he was slightly better in that and maybe a year or two younger, I would say we'd probably put him in tier 2 because he just had that good of a season this year.
Yeah, and next up we've got Jonathan Taylor, or JT. I know he's probably one of your favorite running backs as you're a huge Colts fan. He had 17 and a half points per game this past year. He had a huge bounce back season after dealing with injuries in the past 2 seasons. The one knock on him is he lacks in receiving upside, and he's actually had a little bit of an injury history. Just a few years back, he was probably in the same realm as Brees Hall, maybe Bijan Robinson ish. He was high tier 2, low tier 1, or some boards he was probably the top running back. But injuries and receiving upside has kind of pulled him back to tier three. But in my opinion, I would probably lean for him to be one of the top running backs in this tier three list that we show.
Yeah, I would lean the same way because he's still pretty young, but he has gotten a lot of carries over his career, even if you look back into his college days. And then obviously, like you said, the receiving. He is not a very good receiver. And then I honestly was kind of shocked to see that it was at 17 and a half points per game for him because it seemed very hit or miss for him at times with that Colts offense. Like, I guess the entire Colts offense is.
Yeah, yeah.
And then
Okay,
the
so
next back, we have James Cook here, where he just put up his second 1,000-yard rushing season in a row. He's a great receiving threat, but he doesn't get many receiving touchdowns. And the reason that he is in tier three rather than tier two, because if you look at him compared to tier two, he matches up with a lot of them age wise. He is 24, I believe. But before this season, he had two rushing touchdowns in each of the previous two seasons. And he jumped up from 2 to 16 this year, which is a very hard number to maintain. So I would not expect him to stay around that number. I would expect maybe in the like 6 to 12 range going forward, which would, I'd say, lead him here because he does not have the yardage that the other backs above him would get.
yeah, I think we'll see that running or the touchdown numbers go down as the Bills land their wide receiver one. They're
Yeah.
hoping that Keon Coleman can be that. They're also hoping that Amari Cooper can turn back the clock. But I think they're probably this offseason going to go in. They may be in the T. Higgins sell. They may be trying to get T. Higgins. They may be looking in the draft trying to get a guy. But I definitely think they need to find that wide receiver one to help their offense. As we look here, that's the end of tier three. So I'm going to pull up the tier four list. And as I do, I will say that these are where some of the value running backs are. I'm going to name off the running backs very quickly. I'm going to name their points per game. And, these are the type of guys that I think you could trade minimal draft capital and probably land some of these guys, and they could be some solid RB2s for you coming into the season. After I do that, Billy, I'll let you go into some stats on some certain players. We won't go one by one as we have been, but just your favorites. But looking at here, the first running back, we've got David Montgomery. He splits the backfield with with Gibbs, and he's a double-digit touchdown scorer. But coming into this season, we're not sure, is he still going to have the same production, or is Jahmyr Gibbs going to take over? Is he going to be RB1 with majority of the snaps instead of splitting snaps? We're not sure, but being a double-digit touchdown scorer in a high-powered offense, 15.8 points per game, that's pretty solid, and there's a lot of value there. Next up, we've got Mixon. He's 17.2 points per game, and he's probably the same as these other older running backs, Kamara, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey. He's an older running back, still having a solid season. A lot of value there. Chuba Hubbard, 16.1 points per game. I'll let you get into this one. I know that you had Carolina's other running back, and it kind of hurts your team with him being out for the year, but it definitely brings more value to Chuba.
Yeah, with Chuba, it was a huge breakout season. No one expected this from Chuba. He averaged like 16 points per game. No one expected that going into the year. They expected Jonathan Brooks to take over as soon as he came back from his injury, and then very unfortunately suffered another one after just a couple weeks. But Chuba looked like the back in that backfield. They even extended him. So that's like you could put him in tier three because of that contract extension. They have put money into Chuba. They are invested in Chuba. So if you put him in tier three, if you value him that highly, I'm not going to argue with you. I personally think he fits in a little bit more here because of Jonathan Brooks being drafted in the second round, even though he is injured. He's going to come back eventually. They're going to want to get him involved because of the high draft capital. But with Chuba, it's just hard to argue with the production he had this year. And then next up, we had Kenneth Walker, who had a great season this year, production wise, when he was on the field. He missed, I believe it was 6 games, 6 or 7 games, but he had great production when he was out there. Pretty good receiving back. And then that's another back where you look at who's behind him. There's another second round pick running back behind him. Zach Charbonnet, when he was out there, when Kenneth Walker was out of the game, Charbonnet also looked good. So I think that is the only reason why he isn't maybe a little bit higher up is because Charbonnet could maybe demand a little bit more work with what he's shown this season when he was in. But other than that, Kenneth Walker is another player that if you have Kenneth Walker, you're pretty happy with that.
Yeah,
And then
no, I would
last up
agree.
on here, yeah, last up on here, if you do not recognize Amarion Hampton, he is a rookie coming in this class from North Carolina. He has great size, power, and speed combination. He's a pretty big back. He's pretty fast for his size, and he has really good power. He makes people miss a lot. He breaks tackles. He's a good receiver. He was an early breakout player. His sophomore year, he broke out and put up 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns, and then went and did the exact same thing this year. So I have him as RB2. I'm a huge fan of Amarion Hampton in this draft class. So that's where I would lean for him. If you're not as high on him, you could drop him a tier and put like a Chase Brown or another sort of younger back up there in his place, or you could just even drop him and leave just tier four as those four guys. But I tend to have him higher because I'm a huge fan of Amarion Hampton.
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue with the production and the missed tackles that he's put on film. He's going to be one of the maybe second, third running back drafted next year, probably second. But Caleb Johnson will be up there as well, and I think that it's preference, landing spots that will factor into this. And this is early off season, so this is the way our running back rankings are going to look now, but they can certainly change after the draft. I'm gonna go into their tier 5 here. We'll run through these quickly. We've got James Conner, 15.9 points per game. Another, value guy here. He's an older back. You know, older back, been very productive year after year, but they drafted Trey Benson last year. We don't know. Is he going to be the future, or is James Conner going to be there for another few years and be productive? He's not a
They
guy I
did
would
extend
give.
James Conner though, so they're
Say it
probably
again.
going to use him. So they did extend James Conner during the season, so he's
Okay.
there
Yeah.
for a couple more years.
Yeah. That's very true. It we'll see if he gives us the same production over the next few years. But I definitely think that's a value guy there. As we look in Chase Brown, another guy, 15.9 points per game. He caught fire late into the season. He's still on a rookie deal, but where was he drafted, Billy? He was
I believe he was
drafted pretty
also a
late,
fifth rounder.
fifth round. So same situation as Kyron Williams. Um, you know, doesn't really have the draft capital behind him, but certainly did well for the team, and we will see if they hold on to him. But 15 points per game, and if I'm not mistaken, he had multiple 20 points per games later in the season. So the team could definitely look for him next season, but they could also bring in a rookie and try and do a little split backfield or a little competition there.
Yeah, because they signed Zach Moss in the offseason to try and split some carries there. They traded for Khalil Herbert. So who knows if they want to give him a full workload? They could. They could see what he did late in the season and say, hey, you're our guy. But with how loaded this rookie running back draft class is, they could also draft a guy and take a little bit of work away from Chase Brown. But he is still good enough to where if you have him, he's still going to put up points, at least for next season.
Yes. Yep. And I'm going to skip over Tyron Tracy. I'll let you jump on him. But I'm going to go to DeAndre Swift. I'm pretty high on DeAndre. I've actually got him in our league. He's 26 years old. He only averaged 12 points per game, 12.6 points per game last year. But he's got 2 years left on his deal. He's behind a bad O line. But as we bring in a new coach, maybe a Ben Johnson, maybe an offensive mastermind, that could help him in his production. You would think that now that they have the quarterback, they've got the talent at receiver, at running back, they're probably going to draft in the trenches, try and build this O line up and actually give them something to run behind. So, if you can trade, some minimal draft compensation for him, I think it's a good trade to make.
Yeah, like the Bears were a disaster this year. Almost no one on that team was worth like starting week in and week out in fantasy. So as they get better, get a better coaching, get a better O line, Swift should be a lot better of a play to have.
Yeah. And
And then I'll
he's
go
only
back to
26 years old.
yeah, he's still pretty young for being in the league for as long as he's been. This is his third team. So and then I'll jump back to Tyrone Tracy. It's another rookie this season. He's the only other rookie besides Bucky Irving we have on here. But he took over the role from Singletary around mid-season. He had some very explosive games, multiple I think it was 20 plus point games, some 15 plus point games, but he also had some bad games, like under 10-point games. So you've seen the upside there. He's a very good receiver, but he also is a little bit older. I believe he's 25. He's 24 or 25 as a rookie, which is not what you look for in running backs, but he's new to the running back position as well. So he doesn't have as much as a history of like getting the ball a lot and the wear and tear on him as some other backs would. But 10.7 points per game is not a lot. If you would see that on most of the people on this list, you would just sort of look the other way. But seeing those explosive games he had as just a rookie, the inconsistency is not ideal, but being a late round selection as a rookie and putting up the scores he did in certain games, it's promising.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree. And, as we look next, we've got J.K. Dobbins, who averaged 14.8 points per game. I will say early on in the seasons, he was one of the top backs in fantasy football. He had, if I'm not mistaken, multiple 20-point weeks. He was looking very well with, that John Harbaugh offense. But his problem has been staying healthy. He did come back later in the season and, was around the team, but he's had an extensive injury history. Part of the reason Baltimore let him go. So it wouldn't be a surprise if, the Chargers brought in another running back to compete with him or to try and steal his spot. But, he's definitely a running back that, you could get and it could work out for you next year. He could stay healthy, could have a good season. But, it always makes me iffy about running backs like this that have had the type of injury history.
Yeah, it's very severe injuries too. There's ACL injuries, Achilles injuries, some very serious injuries that most running backs do not come back from. So more credit to him for having the season he had after those
Yeah,
injuries.
that's very true. I'll let you jump into Caleb Johnson, and then after that, maybe you could mention a few guys that you like that are not on this list. A few sleepers or whatever you want to call it, and we'll probably wrap this video up.
Yeah, so Caleb Johnson is our third rookie running back on this list. Really, you could put whoever your RB3 is in the draft class here. It's very situation dependent. So if he goes to a team, like talent wise, I like Caleb Johnson more than the other running backs in this class, not named Genty or Marion Hampton. But if he goes to a situation where he's going to be RB2, but if someone like Travion Henderson or Amarion, or not Amarion Hampton, excuse me, Quinshon Judkins goes to a situation where they're going to get more workload, I would favor them in fantasy over that. But just based on the talent, I would go Caleb Johnson. He is a very big, powerful runner. He's not the fastest or most explosive guy, but he's very powerful. He's not a great receiver either. And he was a little bit of a late breakout. If you watched college football, you knew who he was prior to this season, but he was on that Iowa offense, which was not very good. But this season, he was very good. He single-handedly turned that Iowa offense into something, which
Yeah,
is very
I
impressive to do.
to me as a Steelers fan, he screams a Steelers running back. He's a Najee Harris replacement. Big powerful guy that they can pair with Jalen Warren. And so, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he falls to the Steelers. And it's not just because of the jersey he wears and the similar colors. I think that, he would be a very good replacement for Najee.
Yeah, then you could have Warren take more of the receiving work because Najee is a capable receiver. I'm not saying Caleb isn't a capable receiver, but Jalen Warren is a pretty good receiver, and then Caleb is not quite the level that those guys are receivers. So if you have him take over the bruiser role in that
Mm-hmm.
offense, it'd be a very good fit for him.
Yeah, I'll let you jump into a few of your sleepers or a few guys that didn't make the list here. You can name up a few things, and then we'll close this video out, Billy.
Yeah, I'd say probably the first one I'd jump to is Travis Etienne. He had a rough season. He was top five RB in 2023 and then fell off hard this season, averaged under 10 points per game, but he's still pretty young. He could bounce back and have a season similar to 2023 next year. So don't completely write him off, but with how bad the season was this year for him, I would not put him this high. I'd also include Isaiah Pacheco as someone you could include on there. He got injured this year. And then with the replacements, Kareem Hunt just looked like what you would expect from a running back on the Chiefs. And Pacheco does not have much invested in him on the Chiefs. He was a seventh round draft pick. I would assume they're not going to pay him long term. So I don't know how much value there is there in him.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think Aaron Jones is another one of those guys with the
Yeah,
Minnesota
Aaron Jones
offense.
too.
Was he on a 1 year deal
He's a
this year, or is he going to be
he is.
back?
He's a free agent. So, but
Okay.
he was productive. So he's a free agent. If he lands in a good spot, then maybe you could slide him into that tier five, even though he is an older back.
Yeah, no, and he produced this season. He was 14.2 points per game, and so that was pretty solid with the offense that he was on. It wouldn't surprise me if they brought him back on another short-term deal since he's actually getting up there in age. I think Najee Harris is another one of those backs. Coming from a Pittsburgh fan, he's not going to be back with Pittsburgh. It wouldn't surprise me if he went to a team like the Dallas Cowboys or potentially a team where he could split carries with someone, potentially the Giants. He could be there with Tyron Tracy and kind of have that 1-2 punch with them. But yeah, I think that wraps up our sleepers and guys that didn't make the list, unless you've got anyone else. But that's going to wrap up our first video of Dynasty Playbook. We're going to have more for you guys. We'll do a receivers ranking. We're going to do rookie rankings. We will do drafts. We may bring on a few guys from our league, talk about some things that have went on in our league, or, maybe do mini games. I know I have talked with a few guys of our league and potentially doing something that would be pretty cool. I think, Billy, we could do a draft with a 10-second clock, draft our team, and then the winner is the one that enters their roster and to keep trade cut with the most value. And so see what we know on with a 10-second clock, a quick turnaround, see who can draft the most valuable team. I think that would be pretty fun to bring to you guys. But yeah, we're going to close this video out. Billy, do you have anything left to say? I mean, I think that's going to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think that's about it. But I do want to add in some of the second year backs going into next year. Keep an eye on them, like a Trey Benson. He may not get as much work as you would hope with the James Conner extension, but second year backs break out sometimes if they didn't in their rookie year. So a Trey Benson, I would love it for Jonathan Brooks to break out late in the year, but coming off a second ACL injury, he may not play at all next year. It probably will be not at all next year or very late in the season like this year. But just all the second year backs that maybe flashed a little bit, specifically Trey Benson, a lot of upside there. He was drafted pretty high and then didn't get much work.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. There's definitely going to be some second year backs or some guys where, there's going to be change on the roster. A Jalen Warren with a Najee leaving. I think Jalen's actually on an expiring contract, but with him being an undrafted free agent, I think they're probably going to bring him back on a smaller deal than like a Najee Harris or someone else. And so he's going to be there splitting carries. And if they draft a rookie running back, he's probably going to get majority of the workload early on. And like you mentioned, he's going to have the receiving on his side. So, but I think that's going to wrap up the video for today, guys. Don't forget,